So, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the very first session of Buddhism from the Heart. So, this is going to be happening once a month, and it's suitable for beginners to intermediate. So, yes, feel free to tune in, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions. It's my hope that this will be quite interactive. So, it's different from when we're doing a meditation. But even with meditation, I like to leave a little bit of time for questions if people have them. So, seeing that it's Anzac Day, let's just pause for a few moments and think about the people who lost their lives. And let's pray that at some point human beings will wake up and understand that war is not the way to solve our problems. So the whole theme for these talks is to bring us back to our hearts. I find it interesting that, and very inspiring actually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, my religion is kindness. And kindness is just so important. And according to Buddhism, loving kindness and compassion are innately part of us, part of our something that's at the very depth of our being. I think if we look at the blurb for this particular program, there's a quote from Lama Yeshe, and it says, dwelling deep within our heart and within the hearts of all beings without exception. Isn't that interesting? Without exception is an inexhaustible source of love and wisdom. So all beings without exception. And love in Buddhism is referred to as loving kindness, which is the wish for all beings to be happy. And that's a wonderful aspiration to have. But before I go more into this topic, let's just settle our body, which also helps to settle our mind. So making sure that you're comfortable, whether you're sitting on a chair or whether you're sitting on a cushion on the floor. Just have a straight spine, straight but not rigid. And let's just gently scan the body for any areas of tension. You know, without realizing it, we hold tension in our body and we are very, very rarely completely relaxed. So doing this body scan can bring some awareness to these areas of tension. And when you find them, when you notice them, what we're going to do is, with the out breath, imagine that that tension leaves the body and just dissolves into space. So let's start at the top of our head. Just being aware of any sensations, but particularly on the lookout for tension. And then moving down over the forehead. Be aware of your temples. your eyes, all the little muscles around the eyes, relaxing, releasing. Relax the eyes themselves, nice and soft and gentle, not trying to focus on anything. Moving down over the cheekbones to the mouth, muscles around the mouth. Relaxing the whole of your face. Alan Wallace has this beautiful expression that, so that your face becomes totally relaxed, like that of a sleeping baby. I think it's a beautiful analogy for relaxation, beautiful example. You see a sleeping baby, they don't have a care in the world. Then moving back to the top of the head and down the back of the head. To the base of the skull. Often a lot of tension there. To the tops of the shoulders. And as we're doing this scan, breathing normally and naturally, in a relaxed way, being aware of your body, noticing the tension and releasing it with the out-breath. Now as we travel down the backbone, when you reach the area that is parallel with your shoulder blades, just checking your shoulder blades. Often when we concentrate without realizing it, our shoulders creep up. So traveling all the way to the base of the spine. And enjoying the body at ease. The body feeling supported, stable, still, and safe. And coming back to the tops of the shoulders and moving down to the elbows and the wrists and the hands, back of the hands, palms of the hands. You may feel that there's still quite a bit of tension in your shoulders. If that is the case, gently go back. And with the out-breath, release that tension. Focus on the front of the body now, the top of the chest, the rib cage, the belly, relaxing and allowing gravity to help with the relaxation. Moving to the hip joints, down through the thighs to the knees, down through the calves, the shins, to the ankles and the feet, top of the feet, soles of the feet, all the way to the tips of the toes. And just sitting for a little while with that sense of stability, calmness, and peace. Breathing normally and naturally, not trying to control the breath. Peaceful, calm, still body and mind, because they are interconnected. And now, opening our hearts, thinking about the fact that, just like us, there's nobody on this planet, in fact, there's no living creatures on this planet who want to suffer. Think about your own life, your own experience in life. Sometimes we experience happy and joyful things. Sometimes we experience unpleasant things and we suffer. And we have our hopes and our dreams and our fears for ourselves and our loved ones. Very often we don't get what we want, and instead we get what we don't want. Just examine your own life and check this out. And then think about the people that you love and look at their lives and see how similar they are to your own life. just like you. These people that you love, they have hopes and they have fears, and they have dreams and they have plans. They care about the people they love. They don't want to suffer, but somehow suffering comes and they want to be happy. And lasting happiness always seems to be just around the corner. And think about now, people that you don't really know. I mean, nowadays we're not going out and about very much, but you can go back to those days when we were often out and about. And think about the people that you came into contact with that were still more or less strangers. You saw them occasionally, the person at the bank, the lass at the checkout, if you shop at the same little store or big store. Even some of the people that you work with, but you don't know them very well. The person at traffic lights, the person crossing at the pedestrian crossing. All of these people are just like us. They have hopes and they have dreams. They care about their loved ones. They don't want to suffer. But suffering in all its various forms still arrives. And just like us, they're looking for happiness. But usually the happiness they find is only fleeting. And finally, think about people that you don't like. Might be somebody who has harmed you, or somebody that you see as how shall I put this? Somebody who's behaving in ways that are harmful to others. Or as I mentioned before, may have actually harmed you. And just stop for a moment and consider that this person too has hopes and dreams and cares about their loved ones. They really don't want to suffer. Might be the ways that they look for happiness are not very skillful. But nonetheless, that's what they're looking for. They don't want to suffer, and suffering comes. They get the things they don't want and don't get the things they do want. So just seeing these people as human beings like ourselves, perhaps not acting skillfully, but bring to mind at the very core of their existence is this inexhaustible well of love and wisdom. It's just temporarily covered over. They're not aware of it. So thinking about this, just sit for a little while, thinking about these 4 categories of people in our lives, starting with ourselves and our friends, and then those that we see as strangers, and then those that we dislike. Can you see how we're all the same? And that we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. So based on this understanding, as I mentioned at the beginning, open our hearts. Open your heart. And have a wish that whatever benefit comes from being here this morning, virtually, and learning a little bit about the wisdom of the Buddha, that benefit that you derive can spread out to everybody that you come into contact with. And those of us who have taken bodhisattva vows, we know that we need to start our day remembering that the purpose of our life is to benefit others. And that everything we do is with the wish that these actions will take us a little bit closer to our goal of enlightenment. And that will be a state of mind in which there will be no obstacles whatsoever to prevent us from benefiting others. So just sit for a little while with your positive motivation and your good heart. So it is said in the teachings that there are, as we travel the path to enlightenment, well, here we're going to talk about wings, so it might be we're flying. Very often the lamas use the analogy of the 2 wings of a bird. And they say we need loving kindness and compassion, which are very, very closely interconnected. So that's one wing. And the other wing is wisdom. And I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about these points. And really, let's again define these two states of mind. So as I mentioned before, loving kindness is the wish for beings to be happy, all beings to be happy. That's a big ask, isn't it? But we, slowly we start with ourselves, and then we expand that wish until we encompass all living beings on the planet. And then compassion. Compassion is the wish for all beings to be free of suffering. one of my teachers talks about wisdom with a core of compassion. And as I said, I think quite a bit about this. I mean, I'm no expert, but I've spent a few years involved in Buddhism. And I think compassion is like the springboard, the wish for beings to be free of suffering. And that is what becomes the springboard, becomes the impetus for you to develop your wisdom. Because until you have, eventually perfect wisdom, but if you don't have some level of wisdom, then your compassion can actually cause harm. But if the compassion gives you the determination to keep going, I hope that makes sense. When you look at the life of the Buddha, I suppose everybody's got a reasonably good handle on the life of the Buddha, but he was born a prince, and he had everything that you could wish for on a material level. And his father wanted him to inherit the kingdom, so he more or less kept him in the palace. Mind you, he had 3 palaces for the different seasons, and, he had every luxury that you could think of. And he had a beautiful wife, and he had a son. But at some point, he left the palace, and he saw for the first time a sick person, an old person, and a corpse. And it really, really shocked him. Perhaps, this is the traditional story. And after that happened, none of the luxuries, none of the material benefits that he had from living in this palace, they were suddenly very empty and meaningless. And he set out to find the cause. And of course, I cannot see the mind of the Buddha, but I think he was very much motivated by compassion when he saw that this is what people have to endure. Because he asked his charioteer who was, traveling with him here, when he saw the sick person, he says, "Does this happen to everyone?" And of course the answer was yes. And then he saw the old person. And then again, if people don't die young, then they experience the suffering of old age. So that happens to nearly everyone. And then death. Death happens to everyone without exception. So with this understanding, the Buddha said this is not good enough, basically, and I need to find out where do these things come from? Suffering, old age, sickness, death, birth. And of course, eventually, he found the answer. And if you look at how the teachings on the path evolved, the Buddha began by talking about suffering. Because very often we are complacent and we ignore our suffering, or it's not intense enough for us to want to do something about it. So often people say, Buddhism is very, it's really negative. It talks about old age, sickness, death, suffering, which it does. But on the other side, the Buddha said there's a way out of suffering. One statement that he made is that he teaches that there is suffering and there is a way out of suffering. So the Buddha saw that suffering comes from negative actions. And negative actions come from being under the control of delusions. So the main delusions are ignorance, attachment, and anger. And that's something that we need to think about. The Buddha didn't command us in any way. In fact, he said, don't believe what I say, but check it out. Check it out. See if it accords with your own experience in life. And that's when you believe it. So I think that's a very important aspect of the teachings. So the Buddha didn't have commandments. What he said was, if you don't want to suffer, don't create the causes for suffering. So you can see he was coming from this, he didn't want us to suffer, right? So he said, if you need to avoid the 10 non-virtues. And so what are the 10 non-virtues? And we have to see whether they bring happiness or not. So the very first one is killing, of course. We can all see, I think, in all cultures, in all over the world, killing is seen as very, very negative. And we may think, sometimes people kill to get revenge. But does that work? If we kill somebody, it's very likely that a friend of that person will kill us back, or we'll be put in prison and spend the rest of our lives in prison. So the Buddha said these are the things that we need to avoid: killing and stealing, because it harms. Yeah. If we're coming from this inner loving kindness, we wouldn't do that anyhow. Yeah. So we avoid killing because we care about others. We avoid stealing because we care about others. We avoid sexual misconduct because we care about others. If you're coming from loving kindness and compassion and care, you're not going to engage in any of the non-virtuous actions. And just as we wouldn't like anybody to do these things to us, we make a determination that we're not going to behave negatively towards others. So this all comes back to developing our innate loving kindness and compassion. So does that make sense? Are there any questions so far? Remember, there's no such thing as a silly question. I had somebody text me and say they didn't ask questions because they didn't know how to. So, of course, from this side, I think all you have to do is type in on your, on the live chat. You might have to tap on that. I'm not sure. I mean, on my screen, it's just come up automatically on the right-hand side. So as far as I know, you just type in and it'll come out. I wonder if I can do it. Anyhow, give it a go and see what happens. If you, that's the only way to find out, I think. So if we come back to this innate loving kindness that we all have, and I think we can check. You know, the Buddha said to check everything, didn't he? So why do we feel uncomfortable when we engage in non-virtuous actions? I mean, very few of us go around killing people. And I think most of us don't steal, although we may accidentally on purpose forget to take that book back to the library. I don't think most of us engage in serious stealing, but even then we feel uncomfortable, don't we? And I think that's an indication that we're going against what Buddhists call our Buddha nature. And another thing that His Holiness mentioned is that one of the reasons why people are kind of fascinated when horrible things happen is that it's against Buddha nature. It's not the norm. You know, whether we call it Buddha nature or Christ consciousness, or doesn't matter what we call it. But I think that is innately present in all of us. So if we do something negative, we don't feel comfortable. What do you think? You know, what are your thoughts on that? So when we're operating from this innate goodness, we're not going to harm anybody. And what is the benefit of that? Well, here we come to look at the law of karma. And karma is an incredibly complex topic. And I haven't got time to go into that now, but we can look at some of the basic points. Oh, hang on a minute. Somebody's typed up here. Yes. So Laura's written that it's hard not to feel ashamed. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? So we know that we've done something that was not kind, something that harmed somebody else. What we can do with that shame, rather than putting ourselves down and feeling guilty, I mean, we acknowledge that we've done something negative, right? And then we feel this shame, which can turn into guilt, which is not useful. What we need to have is a sense of very, very sincere regret, which is, you know, you're acknowledging that you've done something negative. But I think guilt kind of snap freezes us and makes us feel that we are terrible, bad people forever and ever and ever. Whereas regret says, okay, I did do whatever it was, and I feel very sincere regret. So we can use that as impetus to make a promise to ourselves that we will do the best we can not to do this type of action again. So it becomes something useful. I hope that makes sense. We're not in any way saying that, you know, you just do something bad and then you say, oh, I really regret and blah, 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 blah. That regret needs to be sincere and felt from the bottom of your heart. It's not like, you know, when you're kids, you're fighting with your brother or your sister or your cousins or whoever it is, and mum comes out and says to you, now that was not nice at all, say sorry. and you go, sorry. I'm not that kind of sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So that's really good, because it's coming back, Laura, as you're saying. We have to come back to trust in our innate goodness and trust that it's there. And I think when we look at our actions, we can see exactly as you said, we do something that harms another person and we feel ashamed and we know that it's not beneficial. It hurts us, doesn't it? It hurts us and it hurts the other person. So then we remember, okay, I did something that harmed another person, but I'm not 100% bad. Basically, I'm a good person. You know, this is what Buddhism is saying, that we are innately pure. The essence of our mind is pure and clear and uncontaminated, right? This is so uplifting. But, and it has this well of loving kindness and compassion and wisdom. But most of the time this is clouded over. But just like they always use the analogy of clouds in the sky. So if we think about our innate pure mind, it's like the clear blue sky. When clouds come into the sky, does the sky change? Think about that. So our delusions are like the clouds, and the Buddha taught us how to remove the delusions, and then we're left with the clear blue sky. So when we do something negative, of course we have sincere regret. Then we do make a promise to ourselves, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, if you're a Buddhist, or, you know, to our own innate Buddha to be. We say, to the best of my ability, I'm not going to do this kind of negative action again. And we do the best we can. Yeah? So how can we check that we have this innate Buddha nature? I mean, eventually, as we study more, meditate more, do more practice, sometimes we get a little glimpse of it. And also, if our delusions were actually mingled with our mind in a way that they couldn't be separated, like water and water, the Buddha would not have taught us how to get rid of our delusions. For example, if anger's a very powerful delusion, isn't it? And we can all connect with what it feels like to be angry, and I don't think it feels good. But if anger was an innate part of us, we'd never be able to get rid of it. Therefore, if we woke up on Monday and we were angry, we'd have to be angry forever and ever and ever. But anger comes and anger goes in dependence upon causes and conditions. So it's not permanent. None of the delusions are permanent. They're what the Buddha called adventitious. And because they're adventitious, they can be removed. So I hope that makes sense. So there are questions around that. So I think we need to constantly remind ourselves that the very core of our being is kind, compassionate, and wise. And we forget that. Normally, our minds are so busy, we're so caught up with what's happening in our lives that we forget to connect with our innate good qualities. So there are meditations that we can do to expand our loving kindness, a little bit like the short one I did this morning, where we think about how, just like us, people have their wishes and their hopes and their fears and their dreams, and they don't want to suffer. They just want to be happy. And if we really investigate that, we can see that it's true. I mean, as I said, one of the wonderful things about Buddhism is that we are not just told, believe what the Buddha said. We're told to check. So how do people feel about that? Do you think that it's true that everybody wants to be happy and nobody wants to suffer? What are your thoughts on that? And also, what are your thoughts about how do we have loving kindness and compassion for people who behave badly? It'd be very good to, put your thoughts up there so we can discuss them. A lot of people have a lot of trouble having compassion for people who do horrible things. So I think it's wonderful that we have the internet and we're using the internet now, but it's very different from having people in the room. So please don't feel shy. Send in your questions. So let's look at how we can apply this principle of operating from loving kindness and compassion to our everyday lives. So ideally, yes. Okay. So I'm presuming everybody can see the live chat, is that right? I think so. I'm all new to this too. Yeah. Okay. So what are my thoughts about suffering when, for example, it's not your fault? Cancer and how to overcome this. Okay. So now this becomes more and more complicated, but that doesn't mean that we can't unravel it. So here we come back to karma. And one way of looking at karma, there's many levels of understanding this word karma. One very simple or basic explanation is that it means cause and effect, right? So another really, really important point. First of all, we've got cause and effect, okay? And then secondly, we've got something which is of utmost importance. Karma is not punishment. A lot of people, you often see things on the net and somebody does something nasty and then some person writes, karma will get you. Well, that is a misunderstanding of karma, because karma is not punishment and it is not reward, but it is cause and effect. It's a natural law like gravity. So very often if we look at our own minds and then somebody does something nasty, and then if we're totally honest, the thought will come into our head, well, I hope something happens to you. So that is, that's a reaction from the not so good part of us, because we want that other person to suffer, right? And so you have that mindset. It's about retribution and punishment. We have to throw that away, right? Oh, okay. You had to access live chat through YouTube. Oh, thanks, Laura, because there was somebody else who had problems and didn't know how to. That I'm hoping other people can see that, but of course, might be not everyone can. So Laura has put up that she had to access the live chat through the YouTube app. So I hope that helps some people. So let's go back to karma not being punishment or reward. So if you look at something like cancer, if you look at cause and effect, I think we can usually work out why people get cancer. There can be many causes. In Australia, we have very, very, very high rates of melanoma. And I reckon that is caused by the fact that many Australians love to go and lie on the beach in the sun and cook themselves. Not putting these people down, but it's kind of what we do in Australia. And so as a result of that, we have a lot of skin cancer. We have a lot of melanoma. We all know that if we a lot of people who smoke end up with lung cancer. Of course, not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer. So this is very interesting. That can also be explained by karma. So if you think, how to do this simply. Okay, according to the teachings, every action that we perform with intention of body, speech, and mind, that leaves an imprint on our consciousness. See, karma is what is called a hidden phenomena. We can't see it, but we can see parallels in the world, in the outside world. So if we use the analogy of a seed, so when we create, let's say, negative actions, because they're the ones who we worry about, because according to Buddhism, they're going to result in suffering. And even according to the world, negative actions are going to result in suffering. If we steal, we'll probably be caught by the police. If we kill, if we steal, if we lie, the taxation department might catch up with us. You know what I mean? So you can see that working on the outside world. So every action that we perform leaves this little seed on our consciousness. And the seed, just like a seed in a packet of seeds in the kitchen drawer, I've got a packet of tomato seeds. They're not going to give me any tomatoes until I have some soil, some water, and some sunshine. So in the same way, the karmic seed on our mind stream needs conditions to ripen. And if you don't have the seed, you're not going to get the tomato plant, right? So that's why you get some people who maybe they work in a place where there's a lot of disease, but they never get sick, because they don't have the karmic seed. There may be a plane crash. Not everybody, always, not everybody in the plane crash dies. Some people survive. So they didn't have that karmic seed, even though the plane crash was like the soil and the water and the sunshine. So with karma, and with an illness, we need certain conditions to come together, and then the illness manifests itself in our body. But if we don't have that karmic seed, we can lie in the sun and we won't get skin cancer. Very, very interesting. That would be the Buddhist perspective on that. It might be a little bit hard to get your head around. But what we have to really take on board, and what is most important, I think, is that karma is not punishment and it's not reward. If we do something positive, it leaves a positive imprint on our consciousness, and then when the conditions come together, we will experience something positive as a result of that past positive action. I hope that's not too complicated. And one of the things, sometimes we get really caught up about karma, and then we start to blame ourselves because now this is happening and I'm such a terrible person. On one level, according to Buddhism, because we've been around since beginningless time, we've created, mountains of negative karma, right? But the Buddha said the only good thing about negativities is that they can be purified. So rather than beating ourselves up, we remember that we are essentially pure, but under the control of a delusion, we created negative actions, and we're genuinely sorry, and we're not going to do that again. So in a way, it doesn't really matter what caused the suffering. I mean, some people really want to know, and you've got to be a Buddha to know. But what we need to be able to do is to accept that under the control of a delusion, I created a negative action, and now I'm experiencing suffering because of it. So we don't need to blame anybody else. We need to accept, and accepting doesn't mean that we don't do something about it. For example, if somebody's hitting us, it would be a complete misunderstanding of karma to say, well, this is my karma ripening, and so I should just sit here and let them hit me. No. You don't have to be a doormat. So it's really, really important that we understand these points about karma. Yes, the thing with karmic imprints is that they're not like, you go to the shop and you buy something and it's got a use-by date. So these karmic imprints, this of course is all coming from the point of view of Buddhism, which believe in the continuity of consciousness, which is to do with rebirth. So when we die, of course the body's gone, but a very subtle mind stream goes from life to life, and it carries all the imprints, all the karmic imprints of all the positive and negative things that we've ever done since beginningless time. Does that make sense? Well, yeah. I think it's important when I think there's a saying in Christianity that the problem is the sin, not the sinner. So it might be, in this context, Christianity is saying that everybody has Christ consciousness. And from time to time, people are going to behave in ways that are not appropriate and that harm others. But the problem is the sin. So when we're looking at karma, the problem is the delusion. Under the control of a delusion, we did something negative. Now, that doesn't let us off the hook, because we know that, in the eyes of the law, you break the law, you have to go to prison, right? But how to put this? Again, we have to, if we're going to blame anybody, we have to blame the delusion. And our job is to understand our minds, to be aware of what is going on in our mind, and to recognize the delusion when it arises and say thank you, but no thank you. I'm not going to allow anger to take control. I'm not going to allow jealousy to take control. I'm not going to allow pride to take control. And that's part of the whole Buddhist path is being mindful, knowing our minds, and then being aware when negative mind states arise. Does that make sense? We have to really get rid of this idea of some entity who is punishing us and rewarding us. We are punishing ourselves. And we, I think, I don't know how many of you know much about the history of this organisation, but the organisation was started by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche many, many years ago. And Lama Yeshe passed away. I forget what year that was, 60-something. Anyhow, his reincarnation is a young Spanish lad. Well, he's a grown-up man now, called Osel. And somebody asked Osel, I think when he's still quite young, what's the difference between, Buddhist hell and Christian hell? Because in Buddhism, we do have hell realms. Buddhism says they're states of mind. But he said, well, I think in Christianity, somebody sends you to hell, but in Buddhism, we send ourselves to hell. So, it's not really a laughing matter, but it's an interesting statement, because I am responsible for my actions of body, speech, and mind. And if I allow my mind to be controlled by negative emotions, then I'm going to create the cause to suffer a lot in the future, and that can be seen as a hell. People who, we only have to look around, and there are parallels of the different Buddhist hell realms out there in the world. I mean, they have hot hells and they have cold hells. And, people get lost in the desert and they die. People get lost in the snow and die. And people who have addictions, that's a hell realm. That's a bit like what we call in Buddhism the hungry ghosts. So according to Buddhism, these are states of mind. That's quite a bit of information there, isn't it? But are we getting a bit of a handle on what karma means from the Buddhist point of view? I think it's important to remember that we are basically pure, and that doesn't mean we can do whatever we like, because what we do will bring a result. Cause and effect. But it helps, one of the things that helps us to have compassion for people who do negative things is if we can understand that they when they do those things, they are not in control. That does not excuse the negative behavior. It is still negative, but it helps us to understand why they did it. For example, I often tell this story. This is a true story. I know it's true because it's about me. So I'm very afraid of spiders. Not redbacks. In fact, there was a redback on the table the other day, and I was cautious, but I didn't just kind of jump up and get as far away as I possibly could. It's the huntsmen, those big hairy ones, and I know they're harmless. So when I was a child, there was a huntsman on the wall and in the room that I was in, and my parents, I don't know, maybe they'd gone down the road to get a bottle of milk or something in the good old days. It was safe to leave your kids at home. I think I would have been 8 or maybe 8. Anyhow, I looked at this spider. I was absolutely terrified. I was convinced that it was going to jump on me. And I went and got the fly spray and I sprayed the spider. Now I have a question for you, and please answer, people. Was I in control? So Laura's saying that it's taking a while for things to come through. So I'll wait a little while and see. I'd like to have some answers to that question. So I'll wait a little while. So there I was, absolutely terrified of the spider, went and got the fly spray, sprayed the spider. The question is, was I in control? Just answer whatever you feel. You can say yes, you can say no. I don't mind if you say yes. I mean, the spider actually died as a result of me spraying it. But the question here is, was I in control? Yes, so Laura's saying not in control because fear took over. Some people will look at that and say, of course she was in control. Nobody twisted her arm and made her go and get the fly spray and spray the spider. But something did, and it was called fear. Yeah? So something very good came out of that. Because I think basically, even as a kid, I was very kind-hearted. I remember kids at school caught a mouse and they were going to take it home and feed it to their cat. And I said, please don't do that. And I ran on, not that I'm an angel. I have faults, obviously. I've got a long way to go on the path. But I said, please don't do that. And I took it home and, we gave it some cheese and we let it go. So, yeah, fear was in control, right? I sprayed the spider and then I saw it going through its death throes and I felt the most incredible remorse that I can imagine. It's still, you could see this poor creature and I just felt absolutely dreadful. And I thought, I'll get the dustpan and brush and I'll put it in the laundry tub and I'll wash the poison off. But then again, fear took control and I couldn't even do that. And if I'd done that, of course, it would not have saved the life of the spider. But the good thing that came out of that is now I'm almost 75 and I've never killed a spider since. I'm still afraid of those big hairy spiders, but I don't harm them. So the lamas often use this analogy to explain that the person who is creating the negative action is not in control. They say if somebody is hitting you with a stick, do you get angry with the stick? And then, of course, the logical answer is you do not get angry with the stick because the stick is being wielded by a person. So the person who's hitting you with the stick is also under the control of a delusion. And as a result of creating that negative action, they've actually put in an order for something very similar to happen to them in the future. Not because they're intrinsically bad people, but because the delusion took control, they created a negative action and they're going to suffer for that. And understanding that, without condoning the negative action, we can have compassion for them. And that is why when people are doing something negative, we have a responsibility to do our best with compassion and kindness to stop them. Because when people are engaging in negative actions, they're actually putting in an order for a similar thing to happen to them in the future. And if we care for everybody equally, we don't want that person to suffer. I hope that makes sense. Karma is not easy. In fact, the Buddha said that you have to be a Buddha to understand the intricacies of karma. But if we learn the basic facts, then we can use that to navigate through our lives. And I think again and again and again, we have to come back to the understanding that we're all the same in that nobody, I mean, this sounds so basic, but do we really stop and think about it? There's nobody who wants to suffer. Well, some people are masochists and then suffering makes them happy. So, but nobody wants to suffer and everybody wants to be happy. And everybody is doing their best to be happy, and we have a right to be happy. But unfortunately, some people in their pursuit of happiness harm others. And that's where the problem comes in. And they harm others when they forget to be kind and compassionate and caring. And as I said right in the beginning, when we engage in a negative action, straight away we don't feel right. So that to me is showing us that we are innately good and kind. And that's what we need to connect with, and that's what we need to nourish, so that, every action that we do, the words that we speak and the things that we do need to be motivated by this innate kindness and compassion. And that's why I was saying, a very good thing to do when we wake up in the morning is to think, I'm not going to do anything today that harms another person. And that's why we have that list of the 10 non-virtues. I'm sure most people know them, but I'll just go through them. I think I only mentioned the first 3. So they're killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. So sexual misconduct means any kind of sexual activity that harms anybody, right? So we're not talking about sexual orientation here. We're talking about if we engage in sexual activity, we need, again, to come from this basic goodness in our hearts and think about, if I engage in sexual activity, what will the outcome be? Am I using my sexual energy to manipulate another person? Am I being kind? Am I being thoughtful? Am I being, adult? Or am I just running after, a little bit of short-term bliss? We have to be kind. So there are 4 non-virtues of speech. So they are lying, harsh speech. So nobody likes to be shouted at and put down and, harsh speech, divisive speech. So if we use our speech to break up friends, break up a group, that is also very negative. And we have to think about when we speak, is it necessary? Is it true? Is it helpful? Some people delight in telling the truth and use it as an excuse to say something nasty. The last negativity of speech is called idle gossip. And you might think, well, that's okay, we just sit around talking about this and that. But very often we pick out one particular person, and then everybody starts dumping on that person, saying nasty things about them, and it kind of turns into a hate fest. And one of the karmic results also of idle gossip, because very often we're talking about things we don't even know whether they're true or not, but we're just spreading rumors. And one of the karmic results of that is that when we're telling the truth, nobody believes us. Okay? So that's the 4 of speech: lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, idle gossip. There's 3 of mind. One is covetousness. That's a lovely old-fashioned word. So wanting things that we don't belong to us. And malice. We may not. So this is with our mind. If somebody does something that we don't like, we may not even say anything to them, but we may think, well, I hope you slip on a banana skin and break your ankle or something. So that's putting out negativity into the world. It's not beneficial, right? So if we're connecting with, and the final one is called wrong view. And this is specifically in the context of Buddhist practitioners. So, for example, if you consider yourself a Buddhist practitioner but you don't believe in karma, might be you don't even believe that enlightenment is possible, then you're stopping yourself from progressing along the path, right? So I hope that makes sense. So if we're coming from loving kindness and compassion, we want to avoid the 10 non-virtues. Does that make sense? Please don't be shy to ask questions, because that's how we all learn. In fact, the lamas, the lamas, they love it when the students put their hand up and say, but that doesn't make sense. They love it when the students, say, please explain that. So feel free to ask questions. We've got about another 10 minutes or so. If you'll excuse me for one moment, I need to go to the bathroom, and you can write your questions. I'll be right back. Sorry about that, folks. That's cause and effect. I had an extra cup of coffee and look what happened. So let's go back to the starting point, which was this beautiful quote from Lama Yeshe that says, dwelling deep within our heart and within the hearts of all beings without exception is an inexhaustible source of love and wisdom. And our job is to uncover that. And the teachings of the Buddha give us very, very precise and clear instructions on how to do that. So first we need to understand the basic principles of the teachings, and then we need to, if they make sense to us and if we decide that, we want to use these teachings as a guideline for our lives, we need to, once we have a good understanding of all the basic points, then coming from our innate good hearts, we work very hard to get rid of all the delusions which cause problems for ourselves and everybody else. And we also develop these innate good qualities of loving kindness and compassion and wisdom to perfection. So what is perfect loving kindness? It means that we have the wish for all beings everywhere to be happy. Perfect compassion is having the wish for all beings everywhere to be free of suffering. and perfect wisdom, eventually we come to understand the nature of reality, and that wisdom then underpins everything. In fact, the three things together, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, they need to inform the way that we live our lives. But if we start off with a sense that we're kind of lowly worms and we're doomed and we're basically bad, then, where do you go from there? It's not very uplifting. Whereas this assertion of the Buddha that we are all innately pure and that the delusions are not part of us, that gives us a really wonderful starting point for our lives. And as I said, we need to investigate. We shouldn't just take the words of the Buddha to be true simply because the Buddha said them. And it's the same with our teachers, our lamas. They say again and again, you don't have to believe this. You need to look into your own mind and check. Do the negativities, negative thoughts, and negative emotions, do they bring happiness? Do they bring suffering? Are you completely negative, or is there something in you that is kind and compassionate and caring? Is this an innate good quality? We need to investigate. And as I think Mathieu Ricard, a very famous monk, and I think he wrote a lot of books about happiness. And he did a lot of research where he looked at how even little toddlers, without anybody teaching them how to be kind, actually act in ways that they want to help others. They did all these research, how little kids will come and help you when you drop something and so on. So that's an interesting book to read because he is putting forward the argument for innate goodness. I'll just see if I can find the name of the book, and I can let you know. It's a very long book, but you can read it slowly. Let me see. Oh, look, I've just got a message saying, yes. There's a little bit of problem with this morning's session. I hope not. Anyhow, just look up the name of that book. It's a very, very interesting book. No, it's hiding from me. Sorry about that, technology. Okay. So it's time to finish off for the morning. So I hope reception's been okay. We don't have any control over that. We have had a few glitches. But anyhow, send us an email and let us know, and we'll see if we can do something from this end. But I'd like to finish with a very beautiful dedication, which is my favourite and also the Dalai Lama's favourite. And I think particularly in these difficult times, we also need to think about people who, not only the people that are suffering because of the virus, but of all the other sufferings in the world that haven't gone away and are still there. So this is the dedication from Bodhisattva's way of life. And it's about dedicating all our positive energy with a wish that this will be the outcome. So I'll just read it. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world. So stay safe and well, look after one another, remember to be kind, and have a look at our program. Everything's online at the moment, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you for joining us. Bye.